Welcome to Cardinals Cover 2 with Craig Grialou and Mike Jurecki. Cardinals Cover 2 is brought to you by Arizona Cardinals Podcasts. Visit azcardinals.com/podcasts. From the Dignity Health Arizona Cardinals Training Center, here's Craig Grialou and Mike Jurecki.
So the question before us is, will we learn anything today? And the answer is absolutely we will. It's just the answer that we're all hoping for, we're not going to get. At least I would not expect to get here on this special edition of Cards Cover 2, a Tuesday edition, as we are awaiting a pre-draft press conference from General Manager Steve Keim and head coach Kliff Kingsbury. Team does this every year, about a week and a half before the draft, and it just so happens that we are 9 days away, and this press conference is coming up at the top of the hour. A lot of questions will be asked. A lot of questions will be asked in a number of different ways because everyone wants to know, MJ, what the Cardinals will do with that number 1 overall pick. I would be stunned if we get any news out of that area, but there might be a hint or two. And then, of course, as we've talked about it on past Cards Cover 2 shows, is yes, this is an opportunity to ask about other players because let's not forget, everyone is focused on number 1. Cardinals have 9 additional draft picks, April 25th, 26th, and 27th.
Yeah, and you're going to get a quality player at number 33, whatever you do at number 1, whether you stay there, whether you go offense, defense, or you try to move down. And, you know, as we get closer to the draft, I just don't know what the price would be to move up for the first overall pick and which teams are moving up for which player. I mean, how many teams are interested in Bosa? Well, San Francisco's sitting at 2. They can take him. He drops to 3, the Jets will take him. He's not going to drop very far. Murray is kind of the wild card because of Kliff Kingsbury's offense, which makes sense for the Arizona Cardinals. But how many other teams are out there? We know that there's teams like the Jaguars. They got Nick Foles, so maybe they're not a team that you would look at. You look at the Redskins. You look at Cincinnati. You know, there's teams out there. The Giants, they got 2 picks in the first round. So who's moving up for what player and what's the cost? And to move up to the number 1 pick when it's a heavy defensive draft, if we had 4 quarterbacks like we did last year in the top 10, it'd be a little bit different. We don't have that type of class, so it's going to be interesting how they approach this. But, you know, the good thing about Steve Keim over the years, when I've sat in that press conference room, not working for the Cardinals, he was always you were able to ask about different players. I'm curious to see if somebody's going to ask about N'Keal Harry. Cardinals will probably look at a wide receiver unless they move back in the first round. I got to think offensive lineman. I've been pushing offensive tackle, but when you get to the NFL, they tell you where you're going to play. So you can draft a guy at offensive tackle. Next thing you know, he's your future guard. So I'll just go offensive line. Obviously, they've solidified the cornerback spot. If a guy's on the board, I think they want to upgrade Tremaine Brock, even though he's got experience playing that slot position. So they're going to have some flexibility when it comes to some of these latter round picks. They got the first pick in the 3rd round, first pick in the 4th round. So when you do that, you're able to kind of maneuver. And if they keep that 33rd pick, Craig, their phone is going to be ringing. And I think that 33rd pick, I'd have to go back to history. I think that 33rd pick has been traded a lot, because teams go back and set their board and they have a first-round grade on a guy and he's still on the board and they feel like, you know what, we got multiple picks in the 2nd or 3rd round. We want to move up. Maybe Arizona's interested, so they may be able to get another 2nd-round pick. But if they like a guy at number 33 and he's a wide receiver that fits what they want to do, they need an X receiver. And if they need a tackle, because we talked about Marcus Gilbert on the final year of his contract, Humphreys needs to stay healthy. So those are our needs looking ahead, even though wide receiver is a plug-and-play guy.
Here are the 10 draft picks the Cardinals own as we speak here on this Tuesday. Obviously, number 1 overall, and then number 33, 65, 103, 139, and 174. Those are the top picks in each of the first 6 rounds. The Cardinals then have a 6th-round compensatory pick and 3 7th-round compensatory picks, including number 254, which is Mr. Irrelevant. And then you add it all up, that is a total of 10. So an opportunity here for the Cardinals not only to draft someone important in the 1st and 2nd rounds, but to fill some depth at offensive line, defensive line, maybe even an inside linebacker, a cornerback as well. there's very few positions, and I've joked, you don't need a kicker, a punter, a long snapper, and I don't know if there is a running back that you would draft unless there was just someone that fell and you're just stunned that they were there and there's better than what you have on the roster. But out of the positions offensively and defensively, running back is the one that you say, we don't need that spot. And any other year, because of what you did the year prior in drafting Josh Rosen, you would add quarterback to that. But because we know what the Kyler Murray discussion, now all of a sudden that becomes a little bit, not a high priority, but it's become a much talked about subject here, and it is going to dominate this pre-draft press conference.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think it's going to be difficult for 10 guys to make this roster. Now, and then I think they're at 74. Don't quote me. I think they're at 74 right now. So you got 10 draft picks. That's 84. And then they're going to bring in a handful, if not 20 to 30 undrafted free agents. Now, some will be offered tryouts. They'll have to come in here and show what they're worth. Some will be offered contracts because they're in command, where maybe their agent's phone was ringing in the 7th round and they got a team that wants to bring them in and give them $15,000. Next team wants to give him $10,000, and the next team wants to give him $7,500. And I go back to Tony Jefferson. Yep. That was the same offseason. They let Kerry Rhodes and Adrian Wilson go. He was projected to be a second-round pick. He goes undrafted, maybe because it's 40 time. And his agent said, I think you should pick Arizona because they just got rid of 2 of their safeties. And the next thing you know, he's a starter. 4 years later, he's a free agent, and now he's in Baltimore. So it's interesting. Now, along those lines, could they parlay those 3 7th-round picks and try to get up to the 5th round for a guy that maybe is more of a depth guy for the future? So they're going to have some wiggle room, but if they keep all 10 picks, it'd be interesting to see how many of those guys actually make the roster. But you do have 10 guys in the practice squad, so if they feel worthy of drafting, but you're also competing with undrafted free agents, guys with a chip on their shoulder.
Well, and the one thing about those compensatory picks in the 7th round is instead of competing with other teams, you could keep those and then say, you know what, you were going to be the first phone call we made post-draft because we want you here. But now instead of you having the control as the player, the team, meaning the Cardinals, with that 254, 249, or 248, say, you know what, we don't want to lose you to team over there or team Y over there. We're just going to draft you, and now you belong to us. And that decision is taken out of your hands as a player who now later in the rounds, you always say, oh, you know what, maybe it's better not to be drafted because then you as the player call the shots.
Well, I've never bought into that. It's got to be a dream for these kids, whether they're a first-round pick, and there's only going to be 32 of those, and there's only going to be 254 players drafted.
And everyone wants to hear their name called.
Right, and there's something about being a 7th-round pick. You don't have to go in there as an undrafted free agent. Now, history says, look at the Patriots roster. Look at the Seahawks roster. 20 to 24 guys are either undrafted free agents or they signed free agents from other clubs. So it's not automatic. You look at the rosters and go, we got 35 draft picks. That doesn't happen in this day and age. Teams move on after 3 or 4 years if you're not what they thought you were going to be. So, but I think for somebody that has played Pop Warner football, played a high level of high school football, got a chance to go to college on a scholarship, yeah, maybe he wasn't the best guy in his team, but he's worthy of being a draft pick. And I understand the agents say, well, this may be a better chance to go somewhere else. I just want to hear my name called. I just wanted to say I was drafted in the NFL, part of 254 guys. That's pretty impressive when you look at everyone that's playing football now.
This is a special edition of Cards Covered 2 here as we broadcast from the Dignity Health Arizona Cardinals Training Center. Craig Grialou and Mike Jurecki broadcasting in our Bose QC35s. Go to Bose.com for more information. Awaiting General Manager Steve Keim and Head Coach Kliff Kingsbury, a pre-draft press conference, something this team does, every team does annually ahead of the draft. Cardinals, of course, front and center when you're talking about the 2019 NFL Draft. They have the number 1 overall pick, a spot they held once upon a time all the way back in 1958 when at that time, yes, they selected a quarterback out of Rice, King Hill. Now, this is the highest at number 1 they've selected since 2011, when that year they drafted a young cornerback out of LSU by the name of Patrick Peterson, 5th overall. And, of course, Pete Twice still on the roster, still dominating among the better cornerbacks here in the NFL. And, of course, when you're drafting that high, top 5, even top 10, you want to hit on someone that is going to be a part of your franchise, your future, if you will, not just for a handful of years, but close to double digits, because those are the most coveted, the most talented, and can turn your franchise around. And we're seeing it with Patrick Peterson now. He's approaching double-digit years and a Pro Bowler 8 consecutive seasons since he has entered the league. So that a huge hit for the Cardinals in 2011.
Yeah, Larry Fitzgerald, 3rd overall. Leonard Davis was a high draft pick. Was he 2nd overall? I mean, he was a high draft pick. Now, obviously, the thought was, is he a guard versus a tackle? And then I think Jonathan Cooper would have had a nice career if he didn't have that devastating injury. They drafted him 7th overall. And that's just part of it. You do all the research, and, that year Chance Warmack went number 10. You don't see guards. You don't normally go that high. But the Cardinals, obviously, when they brought in Russ Grimm and Ken Wisenhunt, they wanted to run the football. That was back in the day. And then Levi Brown and everything else. So for the most part, when you're picking this high, it's a crapshoot. But like you said, you get Patrick and Larry are prime examples. And I'm sure if we talk to 31 other teams, they can give us five guys too. And again, Budda Baker to me is a great draft pick. They move up 9 slots. They ID'd him, and here I think he's got a bright future. I think he could be a Pro Bowl player. I think he could be an All-Pro, given the opportunity to play his natural position. So David Johnson, a guy, a 3rd-round pick, he's earned a new contract. Now we need to get the David Johnson back to the guy who was in 2016. And we know what happened in that draft. They wanted Amir Abdullah. The Lions were on the call, so the Cardinals took Marcus Golden. So you never know, and that's why I always say, who's on the board when the team's on the clock? That dictates what they're going to do.
Of course, the big conversation is, what will the Cardinals do at number 1? Kyler Murray has certainly dominated that conversation. Then you look at some of the other talented defensive players, Nick Bosa, Quinnen Williams, Josh Allen, all 4 of those players certainly in the mix. Any other year, if you're not taking a quarterback, those 3 guys would be in the conversation at number 1 overall. And even before we hit February, before Murray had even declared that, yes, I'm committed 100% to football, the talk was Nick Bosa. And then a little bit later on, it became Quinnen Williams based off what he did in his final season at Alabama. And, of course, how he lit everyone up at the Combine just on how he was able to test and just the agility, the athleticism he showed for such a big man. So someone in this top 5, and dare I say maybe even top 10, top 15, is going to come away with a stud defensive player, because especially along the front 7, this is a very, very deep draft amongst defensive linemen / linebackers.
Yeah, I think the 4 guys you mentioned, you throw in Murray, Williams, you throw in Bosa, and then you throw in Josh Allen. And I don't know if Josh Allen's a great fix for the Cardinals. Clearly he can rush the passer, but he's a guy that can drop back into coverage. Obviously a plug-and-play guy from day one. But the 4 guys you just mentioned and I mentioned, I think they're going to be the first 4 picks off the board in any order.
Yes. You just don't know if the Cardinals trade down potentially to number 4, number 6. I'd be surprised if they traded down past number 10, but that's another possibility that I'm sure Keim and Kingsbury will be asked, as far as, okay, what is the cost for another team to move up to push you out of that number 1 spot, because you don't want to go too far, because then, as you've talked about, MJ, several times, is there's a tier at each position, and if you drop too far down, then instead of getting the top tier at, let's say, linebacker, you're now down to tier 2 or tier 3, but it's a game you have to play, because you're going to find good players in the teens and the 20s, even in the 2nd and 3rd round, but you don't want to make sure, or you don't want to slip and let a quality guy that you know for sure is going to be as a franchise type player, especially when you're picking in the top 5.
And I'm not saying that second tier. I mean, we're talking about possibly 19 to 20 defensive players in this draft. I mean, that would set a record. Okay, that means only 12 or 13 offensive players. We could have a couple quarterbacks, maybe 3. Could have 1 running back, maybe a couple tight ends, a couple wide receivers, and then the rest is going to be offensive line. So this could be a history in the making. So that second tier, I wouldn't even know if they're second tier, but clearly they're behind Bosa, Williams, and Allen. And then I like Devin White. I'm curious to see what the Buccaneers do at number 5. I mean, I don't think they're going to draft a quarterback. They need to protect Jameis Winston, so we could see an offensive lineman go off the board there. Looks like they're trying to get rid of Gerald McCoy. What D tackle do they take there? But I think Devin White really could fill in for a guy like Quan Alexander, who bailed on free agency and went to San Francisco. But I do think Murray, Williams, Bosa, Allen could be the first 4 picks off the board in any order.
It's funny on how this league has become such an offensive-driven league and a quarterback-driven league, yet when it comes to the draft, you're looking at most years in that area as far as quarterback, offensive lineman. But this year, it seems like it's been flipped because it's all about the defense, the defensive linemen,
stop those
the linebackers.
guys.
And yeah, and not that this league is changing. It's all going to be about scoring points and who can score the most points. But as we saw in the Super Bowl, you don't need to score a lot to win and, of course, win a championship. But defense, as they say, wins championships, and defense here in 2019 is going to be the talk of the NFL draft as we are now waiting, and here they come. General Manager Steve Keim and head coach Kliff Kingsbury entering the press conference for this pre-draft presser here from the Dignity Health Arizona Cardinals Training Center.
Good afternoon. 9 days until the much-anticipated 2019 NFL draft. This has been an exciting offseason for our organization thus far. As I look back, I feel like we have filled a number of needs in free agencies, which has given us the opportunity to stick with our philosophy, which is to draft the best player available, no matter if that's at 1, 33, or wherever we may be picking. As we finished up our draft board yesterday, we'll transition this afternoon into our top 120 board, which, as many of you know, we draft off of year in and year out. It really made me reflect and look back on the number of drafts that I've been through and the amount of work that goes into an NFL draft. It's amazing when you really look at it. Over 5,000 reports were written by our college scouts. 450 to 550 were written by our coaching staff, and over 400 all-star reports were written as well. So the amount of work that goes into this process is amazing, and I know Coach had mentioned to me how impressed he was with the process. Our scouting staff does a fantastic job. Those guys spend about 150 to 200 days a year out on the road, and it's amazing the sacrifices that those guys make for this organization, and it can be a thankless job. So I want to give those guys a lot of credit for the amount of information that they've come to the table with this year and the great job that that group has done. Our coaching staff has fit in well. It's been a seamless transition. Those guys have done a fantastic job. They've gone out and worked out players at pro days. They've watched the film. They've turned in their reports. And that's also a necessary part of the process because of so many things. Number one, how a player fits schematically, how the player can learn and process information, and those are all major requirements to be an Arizona Cardinal. Before I get started today, guys, I want to say a few things. Number one, we are not done with this process. We have not made a decision on the first overall pick. All right? Secondly, there are a number of players, in my opinion, and our scouts' opinion, and our coaching staff's opinion, that warrant being the first overall selection. Have we received calls about trading for the first pick or any of our players? Those are the sort of things that I'm going to keep private and in-house, okay? And then the last thing I'm going to ask you is I'm not going to get into hypotheticals today. I'm not going to get into any situations where it's scenarios. We're 9 days away, guys. Anything can happen. So we'll be prepared for next Thursday. We're extremely excited, and we're ready to kick off the 2019 NFL Draft. Questions?
Steve, you talked about the evaluation process, which is every year, but the gravity of having the number one pick, how much does that just kind of weigh on your mind, knowing how the ramifications of getting it right or getting it wrong?
I mean, the preparation is no different. The great news for us is you don't have to sit and procrastinate on whether that player's going to be there or not. So, again, it opens up a lot of different doors for you. It gets you excited. After I've evaluated this group of players, as I look back on it now and I said what I said after the season about having the first pick, I wish I had about 6 more.
When do you anticipate anticipate Steve making the decision on the number 1 pick, and would you expect that maybe to be draft night or anything to happen draft night?
Once we finish with the 120 process, Kliff and I will sit down with Michael Bidwell, and we'll discuss all of our options, and we'll weigh through what makes us better as an organization.
Steve, you said your draft board is done. You're into the transition to the top 120. What is that process like? Is it just the top 120 names? How does that work?
Yeah, well, essentially we create what I call a cardinal filter. So we stack and we rank our players by position accordingly, by grade. And then we'll have conversations now to get through that filter. There's a number of things you have to clear. That's character, it's medical, it's the ability to learn and process information. So there's a number of things that go into it that, again, going through this process year in and year out, you learn a lot of different things. And when it comes down to it, as I said many times, passion for the game is at the top.
How many guys on that? How many on the big board then down to the 120? What's that pairing number like?
There's generally anywhere from about 400 to 450 players on the vertical or on the horizontal board, and then again, to get through that filter, it's pretty tough. And again, there's a lot of different things that weigh into it. Scheme fit is also another thing that's a factor. But as I look at it, there are going to be players that are drafted high that do not make it over to our board.
How do you evaluate passion for the game?
There's a number of different ways. I mean, it's an inexact science, so nobody has perfected it, that's for sure. To be able to realize what a player's incentive is a lot of different things. How they play on tape, the interview process is critical, the way they come off, the way they learn and retain, and then getting to know the people at the college campuses. We talk to so many sources, whether it's trainers, equipment managers, we talk to teachers, so many different people that we go through a long and hardy process to try to find out what makes a player tick. And I think that again, is one of the most important pieces to this.
Is there a reason why you haven't made up your mind on the number 1 pick?
Because we have time.
Kliff, coming from college, is your role in this, does it change at all from maybe what a coach who's been in the NFL for a number of years has been? Do you look at these players any differently, having been so close to the college game recently?
I'm not sure. I think the ones that obviously we played against, you have a good feel for, having scouted them and been around them in the Big 12 a number of years, and knowing their coaches and feeling like you can trust that information. I think that's been helpful. But overall, obviously, I've deferred a lot of it to Steve and his personnel department. They've been phenomenal, kind of helping me transition through this process.
With Kliff, with the number 1 pick, Josh Rosen's obviously been thrust kind of in an uncomfortable position, I would imagine, with all the speculation. How do you think he has handled it? What's your interaction with him been?
Yeah, he's been phenomenal. I mean, he's couldn't have been better, honestly. First one to show up, engaging into it, very sharp, as everybody knows, and can't say enough good things about my interactions with Josh so far.
Well, Steve, how do you balance and weigh things out between taking someone at number 1 or trading down and perhaps looking at getting more picks either this year or even next year?
Well, I mean, that's the game that you have to play. I mean, you have to look at, if you trade back what do you get for it, number 1, and who are the players that are going to be in contention if you trade back that far, versus taking the pick and the type of impact that player has on your organization. And that's $1 million question. We as an organization will take the best player that makes the biggest impact, and that's going to be part of this process, the top 120, that gives you a better understanding. When you start to rank the players vertical, you start to give you a better visual of how far you can drop back or whether you stay in place, and it makes it much easier on draft day.
Steve, since the season started, the off season, you guys have addressed a lot of different areas, free agency, waiver claims, obviously getting a jump on that. How does that impact the draft?
Well, I mean, I think it was important to be aggressive, again, through the wire claims and through free agency, to give us this opportunity to have some flexibility where there weren't positions that were an absolute need. That, again, that's the tough part of this business. It's natural that you can sort of stray towards positions of needs, what gets you in trouble. As long as those players are in a very similar category grade-wise, then it can be a discussion. But if a player and another player, if there's a significant gap, you have to take the best player available, because I say it once, again and again, that your needs in May are always changing. So what we need in October, November will be different from what we needed this spring. But you can't have enough good football players, and you can't have enough depth.
Steve, you signed Kevin White, but do you think, talking about need, is wide receiver something you feel like you need to address somewhere high in the draft?
I mean, we'd like to. I wouldn't say need, but there's no doubt that there's a number of receivers in this draft that we feel are quality players and can certainly help us.
Kliff, you've talked about using a tight end or not, and does that go into it where you can maybe bend your scheme if you like a wide receiver or a tight end better, you can grab that guy and then make it work?
Yeah, I think so. I think we'll adapt to the personnel and put the best players on the field, and that gives us the best chance to win.
What do you think of the tight ends in this year's draft?
I mean, there's some really talented players, no question. I think the depth is there. I think a few of those guys are going to go early, and so it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Steve, what's it been like to watch all the speculation and the interest surrounding what you guys are going to do at number one?
It's been fun. It's been exciting. I mean, I've never had this opportunity and certainly don't want it again. But, you know, when it comes to this press conference and you guys think that this is misinformation, I mean, we're not the only ones spitting it out. There's a lot of it going around. So the fact that I don't know what we're doing but everybody else does, that's concerning.
How much misinformation would you say is out there this time of year?
It's amazing. It really does. It puts it into perspective for me that every time I see a report about another team, I take it with a grain of salt because it's pretty heavy.
Steve, to follow up on something Kliff said about the handling of how Josh Rosen has handled this, has he come to you to ask, say, hey, look, you drafted me last year. What's the situation? Or what's your communication been with Josh?
No, we've had good dialogue, but he is a pro's pro. And the one thing that I've appreciated about him the most since we drafted him, the kid has an unbelievable amount of mental toughness. You saw that last year as he took a beating, and we went through the injuries we went through up front. Physical toughness, mental toughness, Josh Rosen has it all.
Steve, a year after drafting Josh, why are you open to the possibility of drafting a quarterback again?
I never said I was.
Are there any concerns from either one of you that Kyler might return to baseball?
I think whoever drafts him is certainly going to have to address that with him.
Would that be something a smart team would put into his contract with him? He would have to pass on baseball for X amount of years?
Is it legal with the CBA?
So are you not open to drafting a quarterback with number one?
I didn't say that.
When you met with Kyler, I mean, did you ask about the baseball concern? Was that an issue that was brought up?
Maybe.
Hey, Kliff, who are you reaching out to in this process? Given it's your first time going through it in this chair, who is your support network here?
Yeah, Steve. You know, I think he's been through a bunch of them, and just the way he's been through the entire process for me since I've got here day one. You know, I trust him. I knew going in that I'd lean on him through this process, and he and his scouting department have been phenomenal with our coaches and getting our ideas and helping us be a part of this deal.
Steve, you said there's an incredible amount of misinformation going around. Are you possibly giving us some of that misinformation?
No, I usually try to be straightforward with you guys, but there is. But I mean, at this time of year, I mean, we all know the drill. It's fun. It's good for talk shows and TV, but you know, we have a job to do as well.
Steve, I know you said the preparation is the same, but nobody wants to go 3-13 again. How are you sort of managing your way through that?
Well, I mean, it's again, you got to take a lot of pride in your job and make sure that you are thorough and go through all the details. Again, it's an inexact science, so it's a tough business. I mean, if anybody says they're 100%, it's certainly not the case. We have to do what's best for this organization. Again, I say that over and over. And what's going to make the biggest impact on this organization moving forward and give us a chance for sustainable success. But it's fun because the first pick it's one of those things that all these years that I've been doing this, I've always got excited about those kind of players and the big grades that you slap on them. Just you've never had a chance to get to them. But for the first time, I mean, now you're sitting in that spot and it's a little different. But the good news again on draft day, if we don't trade that pick, is we're going to have a player that we fell in love with.
When the two you're discussing prospects, how much do you weigh into how Kliff feels that prospect will fit into his team as opposed to maybe where he fits on your board?
I mean, it's a partnership. He certainly has to feel comfortable with it. I learned as a scout early on that you don't want to force players down coaches' throats. It never really ends well. I mean, once those guys get through baggage claim, there's always a perception from the coach automatically about his willingness or openness to coach that player. we make organizational decisions, so we want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, everybody feels good about it, and we're all headed towards the common goal, which is to win a Super Bowl championship.
How would you take on Quinton Williams?
Dominant defender. I know that his production is more so this year, but I mean, an interior player that is that dominating at that size has been fun to watch. I mean, kind of reminds me back in days when I went and watched Seymour and Stroud and Henderson and those guys coming out, a big dominating presence that can take over games. And you watch the LSU game, it was almost like a highlight tape.
The interior guy, can he have the same value as an edge guy?
He can bounce anywhere from probably like a 3 or 5. He can't. You don't want to play him at a 7 or a wide 9 or anything like that, but he has got tremendous versatility inside.
Compared to previous years, how deep is that defensive line draft?
Extremely deep. That's probably one of the deepest positions, and it's one of the better drafts for defensive linemen I've seen in recent years.
How much interest have you received in that first pick, and how much more do you expect to receive in the next one?
Yeah, as I said, I'm not going to get into the details, but there's definitely been some attention.
You said conversations, any of those conversations give you believe serious pause?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, I get excited. I mean, I like to do deals, but at the same time, I like good players.
Steve said you reflected on your drafts over the years, getting started in this one. How would you grade yourself over the years? How have you done?
Well, I mean, you don't want to know what I think because I am my harshest critic. Actually, I'm number 2 behind my children. They're the hardest on me, then probably you guys and the fans. But you know, that's what drives me every day to be the best and keep working at it and be thorough through the details and lean. The great news for me is we have a tremendous scouting staff. Our coaches are fantastic evaluators. I lean on a lot of those guys in both areas, and I feel like we're going to put together a great draft.
Does Nick Bosa's injury history give you any pause?
I mean, I think that's a part of the puzzle that you have to look at. I would, obviously, because I'm not a doctor, although I may look like one, you got to rely on your medical people, your trainers, your team doctors, to basically give you an indication if those warning signs are an issue or if that's something that was a freak accident. And that's a case-by-case situation.
If you trade out of number 1, is there a spot you're not willing to go past?
I think, again, it goes back to what's the compensation. I mean, if it's compensation you can't trade up or you can't pass up and it's the next 3 drafts of somebody's teams, then you'd have to consider it. But, again, I think because it's more of a visual thing for me and an instinctive thing, there are trade charts and all those different things, but it's where are you trading back to and what are you getting in return? And what player is going to be available when you slide back to, say, 7, 8, 9, 10, wherever you may go.
Kliff, you mentioned the way you like working with Steve. Getting an up-close view of him doing this every day, what are your impressions and why is it reassuring what he's been doing?
Yeah, I think just the scope of information that's been gathered and just how meticulous they've poured through it as a department. It's been fun to watch. I've never seen them from behind the curtain, and they do a tremendous job of evaluating and all the background information, and so it's been fun to watch.
Coach, how much of the offense have you been able to divulge to Josh Rosen?
Quite a bit. Yeah, we're going on our 2nd week of install, and I had him close to an hour and a half a day, and just meetings. But it's been really good. I think he's got a good grasp of it. I think he was familiar to some of what we do in college there at UCLA, and so I think he'll pick it up quick.
Steve, it would seem like the Russell Wilson contract, some of these quarterback contracts, knowing that for at least 4 years, as of right now, you're not going to be having to pay the $130 million deals. When you're putting a roster together, your projections for future years, how much of a window does that kind of give you to kind of build the type of roster you want, not having to pay that media of a contract?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I mean, when you have cost certainty like that, there's no doubt that it gives you unlimited resources to play with around the quarterback position, which, as we all know, is sort of the driver in all of this. But those contracts can really limit you, what you do. I mean, you're seeing that when teams pay a quarterback big dollars, there's a revolving door at different positions. When we paid Carson a good number for a number of years, I mean, there were restrictions that we had from a cap standpoint, but also when you have a good one, you don't want to let him go. So again, it's that double-edged sword. But I'm happy for Russell. He certainly deserves it, and he can take care of some of my alumni donations.
For both of you, how valuable have the 30 visits been, and has any of them swayed opinions, reached any of you about any player?
Yeah, they've been really good. I think you can only see so many at the combine, and so the ones that we came back thinking, hey, we want to take another look at this guy, or somebody popped up late, been able to get him in, get around him, and get a good feel for those players.
I think when you have 15 minutes with them, that's tough. So you want to spend more time, whether it's on their campus or here. It really does open up your eyes, and you get to know them better as a person. But the biggest thing too is we gain from this is to have a number of the players that weren't invited to the combine in, where you can get the medical information and the background as well.
How typical or rare is it for an agent to accompany a player on a trip on a visit?
I've never had one.
That didn't happen last week.
No.
Any changes to your approach over the years?
Yes. I mean, I think you're always trying to tinker with the different things that you learn, and I'd like to think that I'm open-minded to try to hear different suggestions from whether it's from coaches or scouts. I think that in this business, if you're humble enough, you can learn from anybody. And we've done some things differently, and I'm excited about the things that we've put in place. Again, it's more so about continuing to get the person right. And we know a number of them have skills and talent. It's just the heart and the mind that, again, are always going to be challenging the judge.
Steve, why are you unwilling to discuss the number of conversations you've had? Not specifics, but why the unwillingness to even mention?
The conversations with other teams?
Yes.
Well, to me, it's out of respect for them, number one, because I don't need to air their business, and number two, we haven't made any decisions in terms of moving the pick or players or those sort of things. So until that happens, we'll continue to keep it tight to the vest.
Steve, what do you think of some local? We'll make this the last one. Ryan Murphy or Nikhil Harry.
Love him. Murphy has got great skills, really natural anticipation and movement. I mean, he's really sudden in transition as a corner. Also has return ability. Had dinner with him, really good young man, passionate about the game. I think he's going to be a heck of a player in the NFL. And then Nikhil Harry's a big man that can do a lot of different things for you. One thing that excites me about him is his ability to run after the catch. I mean, for a big, long athlete, he's got unique skills after the catch, as well as tracking and adjusting to the football down the field.
Coach, Steve, we appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
You have been listening to a pre-draft press conference involving Cardinals general manager Steve Keim and head coach Kliff Kingsbury, a press conference that went just over 20 minutes, and as expected, a lot of questions about what the Cardinals intend to do. But Keim, from the onset, very direct, even before the first question was asked, tried to get some of those questions not asked by members of the media, and the quote is, "We have not made a decision on the number one pick." In fact, they have not even set their 120 board. That is a process that will begin later on today and over the next couple of days. And when that 120 board has been set, then the decision on the number one overall pick will be made, or the fact that the possibility of trading down from number one, but not until then. Other than that, no decisions made on the number one overall pick, and certainly interesting. And look, we teased about it before we came on the air, that were we going to learn anything? And yeah, we did. We did learn some things, but what we all wanted to hear was what they were going to do at number one, and we didn't get it. And in fact, if you believe Keim, and this is the age of misinformation, so keep that in mind as well. But they have not made a decision yet, and he was asked why not, and his response was, because we have the time. 9 days remain.
Yeah, we've talked about this all along. Obviously, coming off a disappointing season, 3-13, that awarded them the first pick in the draft. Yeah, it's easy to sit here and say you look at the top 5 or 6 guys. In the end, you got to get this right. I mean, and it's a crapshoot. I mean, again, you just don't know what's between the ears. Do they love football? Are they motivated by the lifestyle? And what's in the chest? How much passion do they have? Are they willing to come in here, and when nobody's watching and no cameras around, are they in the film room, breaking down film? They go into the position coach saying, what am I doing wrong? How can you correct this? So, again, you can get all the measurables. They go back and talk to the strength coaches, but you could tell that, and there's been so much misreporting, they have not made a decision. They're still setting their board. And normally when they address us, usually they have that 120 board. When you have the first pick in the draft, what's the hurry? Get all the information, gather it, and then make that decision. So I'm glad that he pointed that out, that they haven't made a decision. And I got to think there's 3 or 4 players in play, whether they stay there or they move down.
He did add a couple of other notes, but just want to remind everyone that the Cardinals draft party is Thursday, April 25th at the Great Lawn just outside State Farm Stadium. 2 key points: admission, parking, both free. Get there early. Of course, the draft begins at 5. You can arrive as early as 4 to the Great Lawn. azcardinals.com/draft party is where you can find more information. As we continue on this special edition of Cards Cover 2 here from the Dignity Health Arizona Cardinals Training Center, Craig Grialou, Mike Jurecki, and now joined by Kyle Odegard of azcardinals.com. You were down there front and center asking questions and big picture it for me, and we joked at the onset of the show that would we learn anything today, and I said we would. We just wouldn't learn what we all want to know, and Keim made that perfectly clear that they would not be announcing that. In fact, they haven't even made a decision. But anything stand out to you just out of the moment without going back through the notes in the full 20 minutes of what was said?
Yeah, I think just kind of the pushback against all of the information that's been flowing, where it seems like it's driven by other reports, and then these reports become fact because everybody takes them as fact, even though it came out of thin air initially. And Steve Keim was asked, why are you interested in Kyler Murray? He said, well, I never even said I was interested in a quarterback. And then, the question, so you're not interested in a quarterback? Well, I never said that. He hasn't come out and said any of that stuff. It's just people projecting from what they hear behind the scenes, and he's just cautioning people that, yeah, you may have heard a lot of things and seen a lot of reports, but from the mouth of Steve Keim, from the mouth of Kliff Kingsbury, there haven't been these things that we kind of project onto them. They're keeping it pretty vanilla, like they should, because obviously the draft's coming up and they don't want to tip their hand. But he was just pointing out that people are running with a lot of things that aren't necessarily fact.
Yeah, and I like the fact that he came out, issued a statement, and then he said, we're not going to be dealing with any hypotheticals, because that's where you kind of put yourself in a corner.
Yeah, and even like right now, no matter what happens, everything gets broken down to the nth degree, and we don't know if it's true. We don't know if it's a smokescreen. So right now there's a bunch of fodder, and people are going to kind of read into everything that's being said, but we don't truly know the intentions of the Cardinals brass, what they want to do, and until we see something definitive, whether that be a trade or the actual selection, then we'll know what their plan is. But I think for now it's clear that as much as people think they know what the Cardinals are going to do, if Steve Keim is saying that we haven't decided yet, yeah, it's still a guess.
Well, the other aspect of the press conference, you mentioned the pushback on the back and forth on the quarterback questions. Well, the option of trading down, and we do know that Keim has a history of trading down, whether that's the first round or later in the draft. And his quote was, "I like to do deals. At the same time, I like to get good players," and that is something. And you could tell that there seemed to be a little bit of a joy. It didn't seem like this, and this might have been just a front for the 20 minutes that we saw him, but there is tremendous pressure on getting this correct. But it does seem to me that he's talking about Steve Keim, that there is somewhat of an enjoyment out of this, because he mentioned it several times. I've never been in this position, and doesn't want to be in it again. But when you're in this position at number 1 or top 3 or top 5, you're getting what you hope to be a solid franchise changing player. So you're weighing that with, okay, what am I going to get if I do drop down however many spots, the compensation. So there is this game you have to play within your own head as far as what do I do, what is going to make this franchise great going forward. And I don't know. To a certain point, I think he's having fun with all of this.
And I think you want your general manager to exude confidence, because there is the scenario where you make the wrong pick and your franchise gets set back, because we've seen that historically where the number 1 pick wasn't as good as the 2 or 3. And when you're talking about this collection of players, you're talking about potential Hall of Famers because they have that sort of talent. So there is a lot of pressure on it, but at the same time, you want somebody who grades them out and then feels very strongly about where they all grade out, and this is the guy I want, and I think this guy is going to change my franchise. And then I think the trade down comes into it where I love this guy who's the 5th rated guy on the board because there's not a huge separation between 1 and 5, and I can get more picks. So as long as he's confident in what he's doing, I think that's what you want. You need a guy who isn't listening to other people or reading all these, outside reports and saying, well, maybe I should be doing that. Steve Keim has been in football all his life. He trusts what he sees on tape. And that's why he's the general manager, because he's made a lot of good decisions to move up the ladder and become a general manager of an NFL team, which thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people want to do. So he's made it here, and now he has to trust what he believes, and he certainly does, like you said, with the confidence he exuded.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this since the season has ended, when they started claiming waiver guys and then obviously signing some guys that were cut before free agency started. I'm not just drinking the Kool-Aid here. There's a lot of excitement in this building, and I think Steve showed that today. I mean, he is enjoying the process. Now, I wouldn't want to be Steve Keim 9 days from now. And again, he's been hired to do this. He's trusting his scouting department. He's trusting the process. They're going through their due diligence. But, the fact that, yes, they don't want to be in this situation in the future, but I think he's enjoying it from a standpoint of there's a lot of good players at the top of the draft, and they want to make sure they get the right one.
And the best player available. And again, something that he's talked about before, your needs in April are not the same in October and November. So sometimes when maybe you look at here in April, why do they draft that position? They already have that. Well, come August and September, that position all of a sudden gets hurt, and you're left with, well, why didn't you take care of that back in April when you had the draft? So this is all something that, we play around with here, not only this month, but then throughout the entire offseason and getting into training camp.
And especially the number 1 pick. Like, you can look at your roster for this year, but the number 1 pick, you're talking about a guy that you think can be a dominant player for 12 years for your team.
At least
so
a decade.
So you're not worried about how does he fit just this season, because if this guy is a building block, whether it be a quarterback, a pass rusher, a corner, wherever it is, if you can get a valuable player at that spot, then it's not a need for a decade, and that helps a lot of things. So certainly at the very top of the draft, I think you just figure out who the most impactful player is, and that's the guy you take.
Well, I mean, we talked about this. I mean, 10 draft picks as of today. They could get more. They could try to maybe parlay some of those 7th-round picks, but I have a hard time thinking all 10 are going to make the roster. But we'll let that play out itself. We know this team has been active undrafted free agents. They made the roster coming out of training camp. But when you're picking 33 and 65, I mean, I would think your first, second, and third-round picks, obviously the first couple should be plug-and-play guys, but when he's talking about needs in November, where if your right tackle goes down, you don't have to force Corey Cunningham in there. You got a guy that's played the position at a high level. Your 3rd-round pick should be a guy that's going to contribute either on special teams or maybe a rotation guy. So that's where the depth comes in. And, yes, they're rookies, but how many rookies played last year? And the bad thing was, we should have had starters out there, but these rookies got more valuable snaps, and they should be ready from year 2. So when you start looking at those 2nd, 3rd, 4th-round picks, we're going to see some of those guys. Again, I think the top 3 picks are guys you're going to have to plug and play from day one.
Let's end this conversation on going back to the fact that no decision has been made. And one of the more interesting comments that at least I thought was made, and it was a question, if I recognize the voice correctly, was Ron Wolfley to Kliff Kingsbury as far as how much of the offense has he been able to relay to Josh Rosen. And the quote was quite a bit, spending an hour and a half a day installing the offense. Now, if you believe a decision has already been made as far as who the number 1 overall pick is, and it's going to be Kyler Murray, why is your head coach spending so much time with a quarterback currently on the roster?
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to read into something, right now it is status quo. I mean, head coach, coaching staff, and players are going about their business here in the offseason, and the general manager and the scouting department are taking care of what they need to take care of.
Yeah, and it's not like drafting Kyler Murray would be completely out of left field. I think everybody believes that's a legitimate option because it's been talked about so much with the connection to Kingsbury and Murray's ability in the air raid. So you understand that thought. But But at the same time, you hear these things like the minute they hired Kliff, they knew they were taking Kyler Murray, and this has been
package deal.
Yeah, this has been a package deal, and they've promised him. And I think clearly that's not the case. And like you said, there is an avenue where you could very easily take somebody else with the number 1 overall pick, roll with Josh Rosen next year, or trade down and accumulate help for Josh Rosen. I think there's a lot of scenarios still in play, and still a week left, right?
9 days.
9 days.
I mean, I know you got to get it right, but they're in a great spot, and you would hope you say that for every team that's picking first overall. I'm sure the Raiders still have withdrawals about Jamarcus Russell. I mean, it's a crapshoot, but you're going to get a quality player as long as he checks all those boxes that Steve talked about.
Once every 60 years to be in this position for a franchise, I think I could handle that. I mean, you go back to 1958 now to 2019. You certainly don't want to be in it again next year or the year after. But, once every 60 years to be in the spotlight of a franchise, why not?
I thought the draft was a big deal when they were picking like 13
Yeah.
and 29 and all these. Like, there's a lot of attention on the draft. No idea until they got the number 1 pick, especially with all the storylines going into it.
Yeah, I mean, ever since the offseason officially, and even the combine, even though the NFL didn't start until March, they have controlled the narrative.
Yeah.
From day one.
Yeah, it's certainly been a lot of fun, and as we've talked about, we've got 9 more days left here to talk about it with you. Kyle, appreciate a couple of minutes, and that is going to wrap up this special edition of Cards Cover 2. Back to our regular schedule on Wednesday afternoon, and don't forget, if you haven't heard, the 2019 regular season schedule will be released at 5 p.m. on Wednesday. Another special edition of Cards Cover 2 coming your way on Wednesday evening as well. Though special thanks here on this episode to those behind the scenes: Tim Delaney, Jim Alejandro, Grayson Choi, Jackson Sipes. For Kyle Odegard, Mike Jurecki, I'm Craig Grialou. This has been your pre-draft press conference special edition of Cards Cover 2.